What is up, guys? This conversation will teach you how to rehab your body as fast as humanly possible. I spent the better part of 2023 rehabbing and training Aaron Rodgers. He went through a pretty dramatic experience with rupturing his Achilles tendon in the beginning of the season. And then from that point forward, it was working with him practically every day, utilizing various different techniques and modalities. And I break down some of those techniques in this conversation. I hope it helps you guys with your own training and rehabilitation. Let's go.
All right, Aaron Alexander, welcome to the Commune podcast. You made it. You made it through DMV.
We're part of the cult.
Yes.
Is a commune eventually turn into a cult? How does that work?
Well, I've considered it, against my own probably self-interest there, but I think we're sort of a buttoned-up cult, if you will. You show up, there's chickens, there's some bees. If you rummage around the drawers enough, you'll probably find some old mushroom chocolate and stuff, but it's not a big polyamorous acid fest.
The big thing with the cult, I think, is shaming if you leave the cult.
Okay,
if you're free to come and go as you please, I don't think it classifies as a cult. So as long as you're not shameful of those that leave the chicken hatchery that you have going, I think you're fine.
Okay, well, consider that as one of the primary criteria as I figure out my next steps here. Yeah, well, you'll have to come and see if you meet all the different criteria for the cult. We are in Topanga. It is a funky situation up there, and a glorious, beautiful one. So I hope you can make it the next time we do this in
for sure
four-dimensional space.
Yeah,
time.
you live in the cult of Topanga, and then you have the micro level of commune beneath that. There's levels to it. It's multi-level system.
I've not yet graduated to the wide brim hat. So once you see me on a podcast with a massive brim, then I finally graduated to the next level.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
All right, so I'm excited to get into movement, arm hanging, posture, somatic healing, mouth taping, functional movement, everything that ladders up into the aligned method and what it is to be aligned. But first, I wanted to see if you'd be willing to talk about your relatively interesting gig that you've had for the last 9 months or so with another Aaron of some repute.
Rodgers, Raji. Yeah, I mean, what do you want to talk about with him? Started working with him like last June or so. The beginning of that was getting him jacked and tan and well slept and ready to go for the new go with the Jets. And then we were successful with that. And then he blew up his Achilles. Thankfully, it was a contact injury, because if it was a non-contact injury, I would have probably been like, I wouldn't have been hung by anybody, but I probably would have, there would have been my own iteration of self-loathing and problems within my internal landscape. Yeah. But thankfully, it was a contact injury.
Yeah, I believe he was sacked on like the fourth snap of the season or something.
It's pretty sad. Yeah, it's really bad. I was there at the game. It was the most electric experience I've ever been in at any type of sporting event. Like the level of obsession that that city had developed around him, and kind of like the myth and lure of this person and what he was going to do for the team and for the city and for all of the things. Like, it was really an amazing experience to be a part of that. And then to have the juxtaposition of the injury, him coming off the field. And I knew pretty immediately, not exactly what it was. Like I was fearful that that's what it was, and then that is what it was. But it definitely was like, oh, this feels like there's a rupture with the way that he was moving and such. And then just it went from maximum, the greatest, most powerful electric energy you've ever experienced, to the complete opposite of that within seconds. It was really actually amazing to be a part of. And then the next 4 months turned into rehab.
Yeah, that collective excitement matched by sort of a collective grief. And I guess just even for some of my audience who probably doesn't watch all the NFL games, this is the Aaron Rodgers, who's one of the most legendary quarterbacks in the NFL, at least for the last 20 years. After we spoke yesterday, briefly, I looked up, and I think he's like the highest rated passer of all time, actually.
He's very consistent. He doesn't get a lot of interceptions. He's very accurate. He has a really impressive ability to read the field. I think that's the thing that separates him from other quarterbacks. He has like a Rain Man like capacity for puzzles and the movements of players and where people will be, kind of that predicting where they'll be. I think that's probably one of the big things that separates him.
Yeah. I think that seems to be characteristic of the great quarterbacks, to have that peripheral vision, even if you actually can't really even have it outside of the helmet, but the sort of sense, that awareness of where everything is in time and space. It's pretty remarkable. So he obviously made his name playing for the Green Bay Packers and won numerous Super Bowls. And then, he's obviously towards the end of his career, but still, very much able to deliver. And so, as you described, then he came to the New York Jets, which has, a legendary franchise, but has been somewhat, I suppose, hapless in the last 10 years. So, his arrival there was celebrated as essentially the second coming.
It was like Christ had arrived to New York.
Yeah, right. And then, of course, on the very, very first game, suffered this horrendous injury. So, I mean, no one knows more about anatomy than you do, at least very much on this call. So a rupture of an Achilles is a fairly serious ordeal.
Yeah. Rupture of anything, but particularly something that's bearing as much weight with as much consistency as the Achilles. It pretty much shuts the whole system down.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you were largely in charge of this one of the most famous rehabilitations in recent history. What did you do? What was how did you start here?
Well, he was working with the rehab facility in the mornings, and then I was in charge, you could say, of everything he was doing after that. So everything outside of the rehab in the morning, the rest of the day was on me for suggestions and actions. And so the first thing was movement. So making sure, and that was something that was really special circumstance for him, which this surgery has been done, many, many different times. It's not like it was exclusive to him doing the specific type of surgery, which allowed him to move faster. But it's decongestion of the tissue. So if someone sustains any type of injury, micro or macro, or whatever the level of severity, maintaining circulation is going to be the most effective thing that a person can do to expedite healing and recovery. So tissue decongestion, and so elevation, compression. We are using light therapy. I know that that's a part of some of the stuff that you're interested in as well. So we're doing infrared therapy very regularly with that. I was doing cold laser, which is like a more concentrated version of light therapy. The list is like very long of all the stuff we're doing. We're doing PMF every day, pulse electromagnetic frequencies. We're doing radio frequency every day. We're doing hyperbaric chamber. We are doing temperature regulation, sauna, cold plunge, lymphatic drainage. So, and then specifically thinking of the leg as a system that's beyond just the ankle itself. So thinking of the body globally, how do we get the entirety of the system to be as optimized for healing as possible? So with lymphatic drainage, you're going up, working in the back of the knee, and particularly working around the groin, working around the guts, and thinking of that whole leg as like a channel. And that channel, think of like a river. If there's any places where there's a dam, then the whole system will be blocked up at the point of that dam. So you really want to think any person that has any type of injury anywhere in the body, think of it as a global phenomenon as opposed to just exclusively an acute phenomenon that you're just focused on that spot. The more that you can optimize the entirety of the system to heal, the faster you will heal both acutely and beyond.
Fascinating. Yeah. Is this mostly to increase kind of circulation such that the body can heal itself, essentially?
Yeah, increased circulation. So from the macro, increase in circulation through the entirety of the system. So the lymphatic system and cardiovascular system and just all the, arteries and veins and all the channels where fluid is moving, helping to create space for that to happen. And then also looking at that circulation from a cellular level as well. And that's where some of the other therapies come in, such as the PMF or such as the radiofrequency. That can be supportive with working with the actual membranes of the cells to help with the passage of fluids in and out of the cells themselves. So thinking of circulation both from the microscopic level as well as from the macro level of circulation through the entire body.
And, I've never had an Achilles rupture, but I imagine you're not particularly ambulatory for a while. So were you helping him maintain just general skeletal muscular health and aerobic health, et cetera?
So we're using a lot of eStim for that. So I was using a device called the Newbie from a company called NewFit, who the founder is called Garrett. He's fantastic, super brilliant in this space. And the Newbie device specifically, it's like the Cadillac of eStim. Uses direct current stimulation as opposed to alternating current. A lot of the cheaper systems are alternating. So it's very soothing for the nervous system as well. And so using that on the muscles that would have been responsible for him to be able to like walk and jog and move around, strapping those muscles up to eStim to kind of replicate innervation of those muscles as though you're still moving. And then that's also helpful. That expansion contraction of the muscles is going to be helpful with circulation. So the biggest thing would be maintain what you have. So in this case, would be like maintaining that muscular innervation, so the system doesn't just completely atrophy, and work on decongestion as much as possible. And they come hand in hand. So if you're able to contract and relax the muscles, the whole entire healing process is going to be expedited significantly. So we're using a lot of eStim for that. And then also doing like compression boots, just a lot of, if you can't get up and ambulate and move and squat and get down on the floor and go up steps and all that stuff yourself, because that's naturally your body just has these innate systems to heal itself. It's just movement. And movement would encompass more than just physical exercise. Movement also would come into the expansion and contraction that transpires as a product of getting hot or getting cold. Movement would be a visual phenomenon as well. It gets dark outside, it gets light outside. You use peripheral vision, you start to become myopic with your vision. Your whole system is going through this expansion, contraction, pulsing type experience. And when any of the systems in the entirety of the body, or the world, the natural biological world, starts to come into, they stop that movement, that's going to be the beginning of problems. So we're kind of, if the body's not innervating itself, we keep on innervating it until it can get enough momentum within itself and keep moving itself. So it's kind of like caretaking that movement till he can move himself was the process.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, I mean, you look at the provenance of so many diseases is imbalance, right? So, that one particular system moves into a polarized state. And if you look at really like health within the human body, I think what you're describing is this sort of natural ebb and flows that exists sort of between on a endocrine level, on a neurotransmitter level, on so many different levels and pathways within the human body. You have your circadian rhythm, you have your sort of natural cortisol wave, your natural melatonin wave, et cetera. Anytime that there is disruption within that essentially that construction and destruction, or that ebb and flow, there generally is some sort of pathological product there. And so it sounds like you were sort of being able to maintain a certain degree of homeostasis, in a situation that otherwise might have limited the body's ability to essentially bounce back into balance.
Yeah, there's a quote, paraphrase quote. I think it's Rumi said something along the lines of your objective is not to seek love; it's to relieve yourself or reduce the points where this is very, very paraphrased, but the parts within yourself where you're blocking yourself from love. So it's not like you need to like reach out and find the love, there's probably some part internally within you that you're actually just contracted and blocked. And the same way that the human organism works from a mental, emotional, psychological lens, or spiritual, depending upon your belief systems and how language like that affects you. I think spirit's a great word. It's the same with the actual physiological expression of the body, and so with taking yourself out of stasis and back into movement and into circulation, sometimes it's not that you need to go out and do something. It's like you actually have a blockage in around your lymphatic glands in your armpit or your groin or your knee. And so you can do all of these amazing exercises and biohacks and whatever, but internally you actually have this blockage that's creating broader stasis and disease. And so, that's kind of that's the task for a person, is find the places where you're blocking yourself from circulation, blocking yourself from love, blocking yourself from abundance, from life, depending on how metaphysical and like secrety you want to go.
Well, sure. Well, this actually bridges into another element of the rehabilitation that I wanted to ask you about, because I assume, because you simply cannot untangle the psychological from the physiological, I've got to imagine that, you had to play the role and of sort of unlicensed psychotherapist on some level, but that that there was, particularly in this situation where there was so much expectation kind of heaped on this guy in this situation, and there's probably a lot of guilt or shame that might be kind of in there of like, oh my God, I've let all these people down. How were you managing that balance between sort of the physiological and psychological rehabilitation?
Humor be the main the main thing.
That's a good one.
Yeah. If you can, it's interesting. Like I've heard this makes sense. You might know better than I do. I should know better than you. Hopefully this is accurate information, but it takes more energy in order to frown than it does to smile. It's more of like an easeful release to smile, whereas you have to actively exert yourself in order to frown, which I just think is very brilliant and amazing. You're like, interesting. Like I'm like actively engaging in resting bitch face. I'm like actively I'm expending caloric energy to be like, this day sucks. I don't like myself. I don't like that person. You're like, you actually need to invest.
Maybe unhappy folks have a higher basal metabolic rate than, no, we don't. If you want to get skinny, get unhappy. I don't think so. I also very much in your book loved the delineation you made between smiling and smizing, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
You're
the Duchenne
smiling
smile.
with your eyes, right?
It's creepy if a person just smiles with their teeth.
Yeah.
It came from an anatomist called, his last name is Duchenne. I don't remember his first name. Antoine Duchenne, something anyways. But that was the differentiation between an authentic smile and a fake, like psychopathic looking smile. Is a person that's authentically smiling. They're smiling with the eye muscles. Yeah. And a person that's not, they just kind of like, geez, start to come out. It's like, it's very uncomfortable to be around.
No, my girls, experience. I have 3 daughters. They call me out when I'm, fake smiling, because when I smize, like my eyes get super Asian. Like,
it's so nice.
Actually, I just found out that I was like Mongolian. Some strange guy like called my mom out of the blue and gave us this whole ancestral history. Anyways, that's a whole nother thing. So being able to joke and laugh and, use humor was a big component of it.
It causes the body to relax. Causes the body, like if a person wants to heal, they need to place themselves into a parasympathetic state or a healing state. Rest, digest, repair, menstruate, go through all those physiological processes that your body doesn't believe it has time to do if it's under threat. And so if you can start to parse out and come into more authenticity with where are the places in my life where I'm maybe creating artificial threats or objective threats, or some iteration of my belief system is such that I feel like I need to batten down the hatches and I need to get hard, and I need to defend or get ready to fight or perhaps get ready to shut down. If a person can become really honest with themselves, I think so much of healing is psycho-emotional. And if a person can come into a place where they're actually can be in more acceptance of the situation, of themselves, of the people around them, of whatever the events that may have transpired, suddenly that creates a visceral sensation of ease, and you can relax. Suddenly you might be able to finally get a full exhalation out because you're not kind of like bracing, waiting for impact. You're like, yeah, you know what? If impact comes, like, so be it. Like, okay. And I think that that's something you're really entrenched in, is the longevity conversation. And I have a lot of curiosity around people that have a very strong avoidance of the concept of death. And I think we talked about this, I think, a little bit yesterday on the phone. And that, from my lens, my perspective, I feel like having a very strong resistance to the inevitability of transitioning out of the body likely would create a subtle or gross form of contraction in the body while you're actually, ambulating and living and breathing. And so the sooner a person can come into a genuine place of acceptance for their death, their life, their family, their relationship, their children, themselves, the sooner a person will allow the spaciousness to be able to actually go deeper into a parasympathetic state, which then allows their body to take over, the intelligence of their body to take over and begin to heal itself.
I 100% agree with you. In fact, this has been a focus of some contemplation recently. And I think freedom from the fear of death is, for me, a pillar of what it means to be a spiritually evolved human being. And we're just at such a curious place within the evolution of our particular species, that for some reason, some fortuitous combination of atoms in the brain, or, depending kind of where your spiritual beliefs are. But we do have this form of consciousness that's lovely in many respects that you and I can, be talking with each other and really enjoy it and know that we're enjoying it. That's very unique to any species of animal. But of course, we both have the double-edged side of that, is that, we both have an uncommon awareness of our own mortality, and that has kind of struck fear in the hearts and minds of men and women, from time immemorial. So we spent many thousands of years killing everything bigger than us, and then we spent the last 150 years killing everything smaller than us, viruses, bacteria, etc. We created all these mythologies, that promised sort of eternal life if we conform to some book or another, but without ever, really truly confronting the notion that we come and go. And, while a certain form of consciousness may be coterminous with, lack of activity in the brain, one can, I think, embrace a certain sensation of feeling kind of connected with the sort of greater pulses of the universe, and lose kind of the paroxysms of anxiety associated with death. And I'm curious, do you have practices? I mean, this deviated very far away from Aaron Rodgers, but just fine. I'll just say, to put a ribbon on that, you were able to shepherd this miraculous recovery and rehabilitation. So good on you. And as a follow-up question, I wonder if you have, related to becoming more comfortable with your own mortality, I mean, do you have specific practices, or is it just kind of a feeling of general acceptance and surrender and ease that you have with it?
I think the biggest fear that I have around death would be not living up to my life's potential. I think that would probably be very common, probably with you, if I were to guess, or like a lot of people in general. That would be the greatest fear. And so the greatest regret probably would be that I didn't open myself up to love, to laughter, to really like experiencing the joy and the magic and the effervescence that life actually has to offer, because ultimately I was afraid. And the reason a person would naturally, it would be sensible as a defense mechanism to be afraid of opening themselves up to life is because if you're opening yourself up to life, you're also opening yourself up to being hurt. So if you're vulnerable enough to actually truly feel, then you're opening yourself up to all sensation. And so that I think is most people's work, spiritual work, slash all of the other levels of work as well. But, with death, there's a couple quotes come to mind. One is like, die before you die. So I'd imagine a person, and I think a lot of people, you, me, people listening to this are probably going through various iterations of kind of like micro dying before they die. Like that's like I think the French term for orgasm is like petite mort or something like that. It's like little death. So every time you go to sleep, it's kind of like a little death. If you have some kind of near death experience, that was maybe like a little bit of a bigger death. Psychedelics oftentimes end up creating like near death type experiences, or kind of like you're at the edges of like, oh, interesting, this is what that is. And if a person is able to die before they die, it feels to me like there would be kind of like life before fear of death and life after fear of death. And if a person truly could embody a nature of being in complete acceptance of their demise, not seeking it, but actually not having resistance to it, I think that it could start to make life almost feel, from that point forward, almost feel like extra credit in a way. And that was something that my dad, he got kind of messed up with various different drugs and all sorts of stuff. When I was a teenager, he ended up going to jail. It was a whole thing. Now he's doing really good. We have a great relationship. But he was like, he would come home and I would rehearse him dying like all the time because I knew he was going to die. He was so strung out on drugs. And so like the tether that he had on his humanity was getting so thin. It was just like, he's definitely going to go at some point. And it was really hard for like a young boy, which I had to unpack a lot of stuff of that within myself with like therapy and things. But after he went to jail, he got out. Life was kind of hard for him for a while. He like refound Jesus again. He's going through various different oscillations of finding Jesus and then getting away. And that's been kind of his main anchor is Christianity, which I think is great. Whatever your anchor is, whatever works for you. But there was a very distinct sensation with him that I experienced where he kind of became like this like enlightened Buddha type figure after that, because he was so close to death and he had already accepted he ruined his entire life. He like disassembled his whole family world. He disassembled his whole financial world. He's like at complete rock bottom. And then suddenly he starts building himself back up like a newborn child in a way. And he, refines Jesus and all the different things. And now he's just in this place of like, I should have been dead 7 years ago. So genuinely every day I wake up because it was so sincere. Like I was so close to death. Like I really, truly died before I died. And now every day forward after that, he obviously still has moments of feeling different ways, but there was an overarching kind of like texture or sensation with him of like, oh my God, like it really is almost like you're living life in this like extra credit type fashion, which is pretty exciting. And we can all do that now. Like you have access to suddenly transferring this place of resisting life and living in fear and living in all the different forms of anxieties and contractions, and actually transitioning oneself into a place of like, oh my God, if this morning I was sure I was going to die experience, how would I relate to my life today? And I think that's, if a person can have that experience and not mangle themselves too much, that's probably one of the greatest blessings a person could have, is actually, dying before they die.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. I mean, the question that it brings up for me is that, do we all have to have this rock bottom inflection point to be able to truly step into that new lease on life, or are there ways at it that might not be as acute? I mean, like in Stoicism, for example, there is a whole practice called memento mori, which is really remembering your own death. which is in some ways could be classified as kind of a negative visualization. So you sit kind of in your own death and kind of acknowledge sort of the unpredictability of your life, and, that you could go at any time, and, all of the things, that would kind of no longer be there that you love and cherish. And you're really kind of pulling yourself into this place, and then you kind of come out with this sort of realization of like, well, no, I am here. It's related to this other kind of Stoic practice of doing something for the last time, like really contemplating on the idea that I will hug my father for the last time, at some point, or it could be completely anodyne. Like I'll make this cup of coffee for the last time, and then think of how much you would appreciate that phone call with your dad or that cup of coffee if you knew it was the last time. And then you come back out of that place and you realize, well, no, I get this opportunity today and tomorrow and the next day. And I think it can be useful kind of in this process of really being able to, I like the way that you put it, sort of have a little death before you actually really die.
It breeds authenticity. So that's I probably like, even as you're talking, I'm starting to go through the visualization. Oh, this is the last conversation I'll ever have. What would I say?
Right.
Would I try to impress you? Would I try to use some polysyllabic words, to make you be like, oh man, Aaron's like really smart.
Yeah.
Would I try to make you think, cultivate some relationship with this avatar version of myself, because I don't actually have acceptance or trust in my own humanity, my own like authentic, more vulnerable version of myself. So I'll kind of placate to what I think you desire, because I don't actually have acceptance of this little boy version of myself or man version of myself, but like the deeper, more sincere, authentic, vulnerable parts of myself. And
interesting.
What would probably happen in a conversation, if you realized it was your last conversation, is you would cut the bullshit. You just be like, and there might be less words. It might be more, just like noticing, how does a person feel? I did a podcast with a psychologist friend called David Sutcliffe. He did this interview with Andrew Tate. I just recorded with Sutcliffe yesterday or 2 days ago. And that was in the Andrew Tate interview, which I'd recommend people listen to that interview. It's like, I think it's called like Andrew Tate versus Psychologist or something. But that was one of the things that finally at the end of the interview, like 2 hours later, Sutcliffe was like, just be present with me. Like I get like lost in your words, and you take me through this mind palace, and you take me through this whole maze of different stories and anecdotes and all these things. But like, I don't feel you. And they kind of had this awkward yet sweet moment towards the end where David was challenging Tate to like, just be with me. Like just feel me for a moment. What is that like for you? Because I think ultimately we have this desire or need for approval, or I might be just speaking for myself, or that a part of that approval is that I have value to bring. So I'm going to try to fill every space with some new factoid or some new joke. I need to be funny. A lot of comedians come from very sad, broken households. And a part of their way to kind of ameliorate that as like a defense mechanism or provide value for their mother or their father or wherever is like, well, I can make jokes. And so who would I be without the jokes? Who would I be without the factoids? Who would I be without XYZ thing that I use as a means of like defending that more deeper, vulnerable, authentic, perhaps quiet version of myself?
Yeah, it's interesting. You may want to superimpose that on top of your potential comment, because it's interesting. I've thought a lot about this myself, because I sort of have been a chronic people pleaser and have, often, lopped my self-worth or kind of base my self-worth kind of through the eyes of approval and other people. And, so much of my own feelings of potential and filling it is kind of connected to that same story. So for example, like if I were to, feel a sense of envy or jealousy for someone else's success, and compare myself to that person, really what that is it's a projection of my own unfulfilled potential, like onto someone else, if you will. Where, I think maybe we have to let go of this idea of potential being like, oh yeah, well, I didn't quite make it to be the president of the United States or to win
terrible
that Grand Slam.
Whoever wants to be the president of the United States, you're a psychopath.
That's true. You're crazy.
You actually
crazy person.
Need help.
Yeah. or win that Grand Slam tennis tournament. I grew up with so many people telling me like, Jeff, you got so much potential. You got so much potential,
bro. Potential never stops.
Someday there'll be a goody out there, and you'll get it. And
yeah.
So I don't know if we ever actually step into our full potential. But
well, it's a story. It's the I'll be happy when. As long as you're running the operating system, I'll be happy when. Like when will never come. You'll have brief, fleeting moments of satiation that last probably no longer than 48 hours or so. You finally win the Super Bowl, or you finally made some money or something. And you're like, I did it. And then oftentimes there's actually a psychological term for it. I don't remember what it is right now. It's something along like the lines of like the moon effect or something, but you go to space, you're an astronaut, you've built your whole entire life around going to space. Finally, you make it to space, you come back down and you feel exactly the same. And now you have no carrot. You've lost your carrot. And now you actually need to face yourself and all of the internal vacuous sensations that manifest as a product of something that happened as a child, probably, or maybe some ancestral stuff that you're carrying on from your parents, or depending upon your perspectives and how deep you want to go in the whole human thing. And then you lose that carrot and you lose your hope, because now you're in a whole new board game. Before you had your myopic vision set on that specific goal. If you lose that goal, who would you be? And it's terrifying, because then you actually are just stuck with yourself.
Yeah, I suppose there's Mars.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
and I hold that out because I think the moon example is interesting, because it sort of eliminates the next goody that appears kind of on the horizon for you, and I think we're all familiar with that hedonic treadmill where that Amazon package comes, and like the moment you open it up, there's some other thing, and that chasm between like where you are and your happiness like gapes back open, and like, oh, there's another thing I can chase. It's another Stoic practice is like, a contemplation on loving what you already have. It's an interesting one. It's like, and again, these things sometimes are very negative visualizations, and where you focus on something that you truly deeply cherish. It could be a relationship or a family heirloom or what have you, and then you actually imagine losing it, and like the sadness and that you would feel around that, and then you come back again into the realization of like, no, it's here, and it's a big part of my life, and there's a lot of gratitude that then comes with that. And
yeah, there's I think her name is her name Carolyn Mice. She wrote this The Soul of Money. You ever read that book or heard of that one before?
Is that Lynn Twist or Carolyn?
Lynn Twist. Carolyn Mice is somebody else. Yeah, Lynn Twist, Soul of Money. That was one of the takeaways from the Soul of Money book, which I thought was worth reading. Was, as opposed to exactly what you're saying, as opposed to continually being in this place of thinking about all the riches that I desire and all the different things, pull yourself back into really valuing everything that you have in this moment, and really, respecting the money that you have, and saying, cool, I have $200 in the bank. It's like, that's okay. Like every one of those dollars, those are like my soldiers, like what do I do? How do I orient around my small army but like Napoleon could do it. There's like Genghis Khan could do it. There's a lot of individuals out there that had tiny little armies, but like, how do I relate to all of my soldiers? Like, okay, let's go. Like, let's train, let's respect the soldiers, let's go, as opposed to putting yourself in this place of like, I'm just going to neglect the army that I have and hope another army arrives. The army's probably not going to arrive like until you respect the soldiers that you actually have.
Yeah. Well, think about it, like, for example, with the human body. I mean, our conventional medicine system tends to focus on the thing that is wrong with you, the one thing, right? And then, and then address that, call it a disease and then address it, with a panoply of drugs or what have you. Wherein, like, even in your description of the rehabilitation of Aaron Rodgers, you were focusing on all of these other things, other parts of him that were optimal and going great, and leveraging them in order to heal the piece that was temporarily broken.
And changing something as well, it would be like passive approaches that a person can take on healing would be augmenting your environment. And so sometimes it's not so much like all the stuff that I need to do. Maybe it's literally, I just need to like pick myself up out of this position on the couch where I'm surrounded by flickering blue lights, and I've got 13 different types of cords, and I got my Wi-Fi router over here beside me, and I'm hooked up to some kind of health tracker ring, and then a health tracker bracelet, and the health tracker necklace, which is all emitting various different forms of non-native radiation. My body's just sitting here scrambled. It's like, what if you just like lifted yourself up by the neck and you just pulled yourself outside and you took your shirt off? Maybe if you can manage it, take your pants off and just sit out in the sun, and like, now maybe instead of eating all these supplements and all this different artificial things, your body's like, what is this information? Maybe just try fasting for a day, and maybe just maybe drink decent water, and so as opposed to the water having a bunch of stuff to protect you with like more things, what if you just got some spring water that's already pretty much perfect? And so it has that signature of earth in the form of structuring that manifests as a product of moving through the different canals and crevices as water travels through the earth, the minerals, natural minerals that would be picking up, and it's naturally filtering. So it's like this perfect imprint. It's like, and so maybe it's, again, that Rumi process of like, the task isn't to seek love, but to remove the obstructions where you're blocking yourself from it. And so in that case, it's like, man, situation A, I have all this different health gadgetry, all the different things, all the supplements, all the stuff, but I'm still kind of feel like this malaise or sickness. Situation B, I pretty much just strip everything. I just go outside. I wear less clothes. I get more sun exposure. I've taken less food for a short period of time. Suddenly my brain starts running on ketones and I feel this like kind of euphoric sensation. I feel clarity. I feel a little bit more optimistic for a moment. I'm, instead of drinking the special water, I'm just drinking some basic bitch spring water, which is like the best you can possibly procure. And now instead of doing like the super amazing exercise program where I'm strapped into my cell phone and I got the trainer thing and all the different stuff, my eyes are going back to the phone, I just take a walk. And instead of wearing the $200 stabilization shoes with all the different technology and whatnot, I take my shoes off entirely. And now suddenly I have to start to leverage and utilize my internal technology, and my body starts to come alive. And now I'm starting to be poured with the negative ions and all the different electrical components from the earth. My inflammation starts to reduce a little bit. I have this joie de vivre is starting to manifest as a product of pretty much doing nothing. That's a route.
I love it, man. Yeah. No, that's it, man. This is the Tao of health, really, right there, which is that, we do become orthorexic, I suppose, kind of, but even in the broader sense, not just, trying to always eat the right foods, but that, this quest to be well can dominate one so much that we're, building this kind of brick house of anxiety. We're like an anxiety mason or something.
Yeah.
And
being well is it's just another carrot. It's
Yeah.
just another illusion. You
like
you already have it. You have it right now.
Right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. And you know, fasting was really interesting process for me because I think it kind of in combination with meditation, it 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 made me kind of help me delineate between what was a biological need and what was a psychological desire, I guess. Um, where you know, so much of what we kind of add to our lives is a product of psychological desire and not really a biological need. And if you can start to kind of delineate between those two things and find that space between like stimulus, the hunger, and response, like mindlessly going to the cupboard, whatever, um, and then be like, okay, wait, you know, is this something that I truly biologically need? Okay, well, maybe it is. But I think what you just described is that we actually don't need very much.
Not as much as we think we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Generally speaking, I mean, I can't speak for, I can only speak for myself and people I'm exposed to, but generally speaking, I think that's, and if you look, it makes sense. And one could have compassion for Western culture, and particularly because you're completely inundated by hundreds or thousands or millions of advertisements all the time. Well, maybe not millions in a day, but hundreds in a day, millions with a little bit of time. Give yourself a little time. Millions of advertisements being poured through your eyes and through your ears. And at the root of those advertisements, they're suggesting that you will be happy when, and that was the beginning of what's the fellow's name? Is the father of modern advertising, is the nephew of Sigmund Freud. His name is it was his idea to do freedom sticks with gals in the 20s. They were like using cigarettes as an indication of like saying screw you to the patriarchy. So it's like this flaming phallus that they had in their mouth, and they're walking down, they're all proud while they're giving themselves lung cancer. And so it's reforming one's identity structure. If you can get into somebody's identity structure and their emotional perception of their self through advertising, now you're really selling. And so you just think like a person could step back and have some compassion for themselves of like, oh my God, like it ain't easy out here to be a modern human and to be happy. The deck is actually stacked against you to be happy because you are not as profitable as a consumer when you're happy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and it wasn't long ago where we were just really trading in like bones and fur. So it's very kind of understandable that we haven't been able to adapt kind of quickly enough to meet the transformational nature of our culture. So it's like, yeah, like you say, thousands of images every day, essentially telling you you're not enough, and then marketing some trinket or product or service to assuage your perceived deficiency. I mean, that is a relatively new
it's crazy,
phenomenon,
man. Yeah. When you really take that, Edward Bernays is the name of the guy, by the way. But yeah, when you really take that, it's like,
don't get saucy with me, Bernays.
Sorry. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, it's wild when you really like. I think just having moments of like, how often does a person really have compassion for themselves? Like that'd be something. It's like it's a lot easier to shit on myself than to come into a place of like treat myself like my father or my mother or the combination of the two. And the father might be masculine, might be more stern, might push me into challenges, might believe that I can do something that I think I can't believe I can do, so push me into things that are harder than I believe I can accomplish. And then that the feminine nurturing side would be like no, I love you unconditionally. You really don't need to do anything. Like for a person to hold that balance, I think that's like a more integrated version of a person. Sometimes it can go a little too soft and yin, where it's like, oh yeah, like love yourself unconditionally. It's like, no, sometimes you do some shameful shit. And that feeling of shame, of dread that you have is actually a really great mechanism instilled within you to cause you to do better or not screw that person over. Don't lie. Don't hurt XYZ person. Don't hurt yourself. So being like, oh, wow, shame. Okay. Like I can lean into this. Like this is this feeling that it hurts so deeply. Like I don't want to get rid of that. But then also simultaneously being able to hold that other aspect of the reason that I lied to that person, or the reason that I hurt that person, the reason that I stole, the reason I was greedy, the reason I was anything. I cussed the person out at the DMV, which I didn't do, is because I'm afraid. So then the motherly quality comes in. Oh, I felt like I didn't have enough. I felt like I wasn't going to make it. I felt like I wasn't worthy. So I put up this defensive and this anger shield. So being able to wield, like reparent yourself in a way, it's like a term that I learned from therapy as well. And going through and providing that, both that masculine energy of like, no, bitch, like, let's go. Like we're going to war. We're going to go hard. We're going to push beyond what you think is possible. So important. And simultaneously holding the other side of no matter what, I love you. And no matter what, you've got me and I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. That's like a pretty powerful combination, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think you just described sort of the intelligence, the cosmic intelligence of the world, really, which is to bring, oppositional forces into some form of, tenuous, sensitive balance, if you will. Like, so even if you look at the nature of strength, right? So there's always like a little bit of suppleness inside of strength. Even like your physical body is actually a beautiful, almost kind of ridiculously literal version of that statement. But you're like incredibly strong. You looked amazingly jacked, basically. But there is a suppleness to the way that you are and look and move too. It's sort of like and I think the metaphor is like the oak tree under like a tremendous pile of snow. Like the boughs are very stiff and strong, and eventually they'll break under the weight. But sort of the willow tree can kind of bend, and the snow just eventually like sloughs off, and the branches like pop back up into perfect balance again. So
yes, a supple body can heal.
Yeah,
and the body is the suppleness and the tone of your muscles and organs and all of the different structures and systems of the body. It's all tied to your autonomic nervous system. And so if the nervous system is in a place of threat, then it will tense a little bit. And suddenly a person's breathing patterns will start to become a bit more emphasized on the inhalation. They'll start to breathe with more like the emergency breathing muscles. So the breath will start coming up more from the clavicle and more from the traps and more from the muscles and like the upper portion of the sternum and the lungs. So that's how you're actually going to fill a much smaller percentage of the lungs. So the upper lobes of the lungs are much narrower. The lower lobes are much wider. And so you go into this emergency threat response. You have a physiological, structural translation, immediate, one-to-one. The moment that you go into a place of the world's not safe, I don't feel safe, I need to either get the heck out of here or plan to fight. Your whole physical body, whether it's a story, a dream, your high, whatever it is, there is a one-to-one immediate physical translation to every thought that you think. It's very powerful when you can start to, it's like, oh, interesting. So what's interesting about that, among a lot of things, is so it's this two-way street. They're tied to each other. You can pull on either side. And so you don't need to fix the body with the mind, and you don't need to fix the mind with the body. You don't need to fix the body with the body. You don't need to fix the mind with the mind. You just need to start. So it could be, if you're having stress in the mind, you could do some breathing practices. You could emphasize the exhalation. You could emphasize humming. Humming increases nitric oxide production by 15 to 16 fold, which is impressive. So now suddenly you're breathing in through this nasal breathing, more nitric oxide. Now suddenly you're becoming more vasodilated, and your blood vessels become more porous, and they start to become more open to give and receive oxygen and nutrients and all the different vital fluids. Just because you augmented your breathing just a little bit. suddenly your whole body starts to open up. And now suddenly your voice tone starts to change a little bit. Maybe you get a little slower. You talk a little bit deeper. People start to trust you more because there's not an underlying feeling of autonomic threat happening with you. Now suddenly the world starts to open up because you become a safe person because you did some breathing practices and you relax your eyes. And then the same thing could be said the other way. If you do a meditation, you have a conversation with somebody that you really enjoy, you feel like you're in love, that will trickle back into physiologically expressing safety.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the bidirectionality. I think we have a sense for it sometimes more in the kind of monodirectional way of like, our thoughts can influence our physiology. That seems to be slightly more in vogue and accepted these days. But the bidirectionality, I think, is something that's more interesting, is that, our body has sort of subconscious involuntary reactions that then can influence our thoughts, right? So there may be, patterns stuck within the body, whether that's kind of due to some kind of trauma-inducing event or whatever, that will, trigger all of the sort of physiological, typical presentations of the sympathetic nervous system. So, your heart rate goes up and your breath rate goes up and, your pupils dilate and, your glucose like goes to your extremities, and we've all kind of seen people that sort of operate in that space all the time.
It's like uncomfortable to be around.
Yeah, it's
because
like
we're tuning to each other.
Yeah, totally. And it's like really chippy and very shallow breaths and super high energy. And then, of course, like we don't have to do it here, but we know what the long-term kind of physiological impacts are of that, of the long-term impacts of that endocrine stimulation, what that is, from the gut and the immune system and, et cetera. So I think, what I love in your book, you talk about 5 specific principles to make the body stronger and the mind stronger. And what I love is stress proof your life. So for me, that always kind of makes me think of like, how do we absorb essentially like a stressful, some sort of stressful event in our life? How do we absorb that and then actually return to homeostasis, have essentially a healthy stress response? And so, you do a great job at enumerating some, and I think, you just pointed to one with, essentially how we can use conscious breath to impact subconscious activity. Nasal breathing is something that I think has become people become more and more interested in. I'm sure you read James Nestor's book, which is really fascinating, and some other ones.
You just need to increase the depth and vastness of your stress bucket, which is a made up term. But some people have the issue with many folks. Folks may experience this in relationship, be a common place where you and your partner, you're in a good spot for, a few hours or a few days or whatever. You're like, man, things are good. And then you do something, you leave the wet towel out on the bed or something. And suddenly the whole house of cards just collapses. And we're right back to where we were 3 days ago or a week ago, whatever the thing is. It's like, I thought we were past this. I thought we were like in a really good spot. You were in a really good spot. But what you didn't realize is the stress bucket of one or both of the partners is actually brimming. And it was percolating over. So like the temperature to boil water what's the temperature to boil water? I don't remember what it is right now. What is it?
It's 212 degrees Fahrenheit,
right.
I think. Right?
So the temperature to boil water is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it seems like when you're at 212, you're like, oh my God, chaos. It's crazy. We're reactive. We're calling each other names. We're stonewalling. We're doing all the different things that like you're not supposed to do. The John Gottman 4 horsemen, they're very present. And then suddenly you get down to 210 and you're like, oh, I love you. This is great. I feel totally at ease. This feels so good. And what you don't realize is you never got yourself down to like 150. And if a person can start to insulate their life regularly with decompressive behavior and they instill that into who they are as a person. Decompressive behavior would be all stuff that you talk about, but relaxing your eyes. Every time you're looking down at your phone, it's a slightly compressive behavior. It's turning your nervous system up just a little bit to become a little bit more acutely aware of what's happening. Puts you a little bit more in that sympathetic place. Every time you breathe in through your mouth, if you go do, say you're going to do like some hyperventilation breathwork thing, that's great. It can have a cathartic effect. It can take you into those deeper layers of trauma or held stress that you may be having, but you're actually amping your nervous system up significantly. So with regularity, start to pay attention to your breathing and just emphasize the exhalation and start almost exclusively breathing through the nose, unless you're actually really truly in a place where a friend, Brian McKenzie, he breaks down like a gear system for respiration, and he would refer to fifth gear as mouth breathing. So you're like maxing out, you're at the end of some big race, you're up the top of Everest, whatever it is, you're like, I'm really maxed out here, then it's fine. But just be aware that every time you breathe, you're sending a signal of either let's compress or decompress. And if you could start to, with regularity, breathe in such a way that's just moderately decompressive, you're slowly decreasing that temperature of the potentially boiling water inside that stress bucket every breath that you take. And you're taking like 20,000 odd breaths each day. If you are taking a meeting with someone and the potentials would be to be inside a flickering light, blue lit room with a bunch of non-native EMF, which is taking your autonomic nervous system into a little bit more of a place of dysregulation, which actually it's like excessive consistency is the problem. When you go outside and you're exposed to earth and trees and all that stuff, there's this kind of harmonic up and down. It's like you're being played by the song of nature, by the frequency of nature. Whereas when you go into a high rise and you're exposed to EMF or like non-native EMF, it's repetitive and your body gets out of sync. So like heart rate variability, a healthier, more robust organism is a more variable organism. And so we're continually attuning to the world around us. So we attune to the frequencies that we're exposed to inside a high rise or inside an office building. It's too consistent. And we attune to that, and it throws our body into this stress response. It's like, okay, we need to defend again. I think we're sick. So instead of placing yourself into that environment that's inherently just a little bit more stressful, it's just going to raise your temperature up a little bit. It might be subperceptible. Take yourself outside and you have an hour and a half of calls that day. Take them outside in the sun and take a walk. Have walking meetings. You have a group of people. You're going to sit around a table inside the meeting room. Half the people are probably going to be looking at their phones, not paying attention anyway. What am I doing here? I don't feel purposeful in this. What's going on? Be like Steve Jobs and invest millions of dollars in an outdoor walking area to induce creativity and health and libido and joie de vivre and all of the different things. That's another way to just slowly reduce the temperature of the fluid inside that stress bucket. There's a lot of different ways, but just start thinking of like, okay, I want to start to work on the roof before there's a storm coming. And if you're feeling good right now, it is the best time to start utilizing and leveraging stress reducing behavior. Because once you're in a reactive state, it's not too late. Like you can still come back to the practices, but it's a lot harder. So way better to develop a better, more efficient buffering system while you're feeling good than waiting until you're completely falling apart and you're cussing out the clerk at the DMV.
Yeah, I think John F. Kennedy has a quote about that, but it makes me think better to get ourselves healthy and focus on health before there's a pandemic. Right? It's like there's an opportunity here to fix the roof before there's a downpour. But you're absolutely right. I think I mentioned I was at this conference for the last couple of days. The most meaningful and productive components of the conference, I can say this for myself, but I could also just witness this, was not in the kind of the stuffy room with kind of the rank on rank chairs with the PowerPoints. It was like the people that were splitting off and like, walking around the grounds, and you could just see that in their body language. They were like animated and they were in this dance. And like, those were, for me, what I got out of this, the biggest thing I got out of it was a couple of these really wonderful relationships that I developed through these very animated talks, but they were all outside. They were all walking. So I think you totally nailed it. The other thing that's made a huge impact in my own life, and I know you talk about it in your book, is how we sit. And obviously, you do an amazing job talking in the book about all of the opportunities for sitting in chairs and essentially what a evolutionary mismatch that is, and to get yourself kind of on the ground. So in the last kind of 6 to 8 months, I've started squatting like all the time, and it's just totally, completely changed my body and my sense of balance and mobility and stability. You talk a little bit about your floor sitting proclivities.
Yeah. I'm sitting on the floor right now, so that's
I
like,
noticed.
Yeah. And that's, to me, is I just do it because I got to do it. I think that I'm pretty, hopefully not offensive, but not very apologetic about something that I know is for the best for my cells, my connective tissue, and all of the different constituents of this biological organism that I'm caretaking for. And so if you're living in a culture that's inherently sick, if you look at the trajectory of Western culture, most of the possible quantitative metrics you could look at, it's like, seems like we're getting sicker, while we have access to the most modern, amazing medicine, and everybody takes athletic greens, and everybody suns their butthole or whatever. And it's like, how are we getting sicker when we have access to all of this different stuff? And so I think that's like one of the big things is it's can be shameful to be different. And for me personally, like I was just lamenting about being in the DMV before this. Throughout my DMV experience, I was there for like 2 hours. I walked outside for an hour and a half of that time, and I would just walk back in. I probably got 5,000 steps just wandering around. It started to drizzle a little bit. I was like, this feels great. Drizzle and skin. Love this. And then go back in. Okay, we're getting close to the number. And then I find a wall and I lean back up against the wall and I squat, as opposed to going into that same habituated position that you've been entrenched in since you went from being this really jubilant, curious child as a 4-year-old. And then suddenly you get placed into this seat. And now we have the iPads in front of us, and it's like stasis. So now we're creating stasis as being the norm. And if you can't maintain stasis as this curious, magical, dreamy child, if you can't just go into stasis, there's probably something wrong with you. Yeah. We need to address that. We have tools to address that.
Right. Yeah.
And so something as simple as just like spending time on the ground, it naturally, passively, almost effortlessly, but there is effort, that's what makes it healthy, induces the body into a variety of different positions. And so since we've been talking, right now my legs are crossed. I've been in a 90-90 position with my legs going one way, 90-90 position with my legs going another way. I was in like a straddle position for a little bit. Maybe I'll, bring my feet onto the ground and kind of hold my knees for a second. Every time I'm doing that, the body's going through all these amazing processes. So the 50-cent term for the chemical translation of mechanical movement is called mechanotransduction. Every time I move my body at all, I'm just pronating, supinating my wrist. I'm literally orchestrating all of these physiological events to transpire within my forearm. That's it. It's just this magical process sets off this cascade of circulation and innervation, this electrical storm. Just just choosing to do that.
Yeah.
And so take so that awesome. It's like wow.
Yeah, right.
And that's why you get so electrified from a conversation that's stimulating, because it's causing this neuronal storm from maybe you were a little bit emotionally vulnerable. Maybe you said some jokes. You weren't sure how they were going to land. You were, using different forms of body language, and, you were gesticulating, putting your hands in different places. Maybe you're talking to an Italian person. You're like, oh my God, now our body language is all over the place. You're healing the body on all of these different levels just by engaging in that dynamic conversation, compared to the kind of like styrofoam version of connection, which is social media and emails and such, where now I'm taking what could be this really healing event called human communication, and I'm kind of like white labeling it, or like neutering it, sterilizing it into the same repetitive thumb scanning across the form. I'm taking my whole body through this kind of like stressful event as I'm sending this message out to my friend. So something as simple as just like, what if throughout the day I just took a shot, got the Align Method book or program or whatever, one of the things they suggested, spend at least 30 minutes a day on the ground. Okay, I'm going to do that. I've already done an hour and change on the ground, so I'm already, already maxed out the Align Method. Kudos to me. And I eat breakfast. I get a floor cushion. I make sure my hips are above the height of my knees. That's going to optimize balance and stability and neutrality, like stacking my hips and my pelvis. Suddenly my respiratory diaphragm is balanced with my pelvic floor. Maybe I pay attention. I'm going to draw my shoulders back a little bit. Maybe I'm going to lift my arms up over my head a little bit. Maybe I'm going to get a pull-up bar. I'm going to hang a little bit. Just adding those very subtle, just almost just like nothing stimuli into the system that starts to allow the body at a deep cellular structural level to begin to breathe. And the modern mold that we live in, it is congestive for the body. And what's congestive for the body is congestive for everything else. And then you start to feel like I think I felt like this in certain ways. I'm sure other people probably feel like this to even higher degree than I have, but like you almost feel like imprisoned in your body in a way. And that imprisonment sensation, it would be a feeling of like stiffness. Like I'm almost like wearing a straitjacket. That straitjacket is your body starts to callous and starts to thicken in the places that it doesn't move. And now suddenly you lose real estate. So you had this big lush plot of land that you were born with, and you had access to all these different ranges and spaces. You can breathe. And if you don't actively choose to inhabit all of the real estate within yourself, it starts to close off to you and you don't have access to it until eventually all you have is this little hubble that you can execute your life from. And you start to feel stuff, and you start to feel stiff, and you start to feel maybe a little anxious because you're feeling all bound up. Maybe you start to feel depressed because you're not expressed. Yeah, sorry for the play on words. And a really simple solution, like it's just such absurdly low hanging fruit. Like I feel stupid talking about this stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
Because it's so dumb. Well, it's just what just allowed your body to move a little bit more throughout the day, passively through the ways that you live your life.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just because it's hidden in plain sight, right? It's so simple to do, yet it's so rarely done. I mean, I think, where I love what you do and what the spirit that you inhabit is that what you're really, I think, helping people is to gain a relationship with the experience of being alive, of being this physical thing, right? And, it's so easy to kind of really just associate ourselves with this kind of cognitive locus somewhere here between our eyes, like locked up in this kind of bag of skin that we sort of have. That's like a kind of a car that like we have, and if like it's not working properly, well, we take it in to the mechanic doctor.
Someone else will solve it at some point. Yeah.
this sort of greater identification with this sort of miracle of 7 octillion self-assembled atoms, having, billions upon billions of chemical reactions every second. It's like there's an awesomeness, there's an awe there, there's a wonder there, but there's also really a place to inhabit that. That is truly the thing that you are, and we so associate ourselves with our mind, that every time I listen to you and I read and I listen to your podcast, I'm so much more in touch with my own, or aware of my own physical body. I think there's a quote in your book. I think it's a Bessel van der Kolk quote, maybe.
There's a lot of them from him.
There's a lot of them, but I think it's like physical self-awareness is the first step to release the tyranny of the past, something to that regard.
That's exactly correct.
And I was like, oh yeah. Yeah, and we know that by dint of our own, experience. Like when we feel truly at ease, right, in our body, that's a sensation that we sort of instinctively want to be in that place. And anyways, I think so many of it's not just your modalities, but yes, you have many protocol specific praxis that help us get there. But I think there's an overall spirit to your work and how you express it that helps us get there. Yeah, you help.
I appreciate it. It's because I've been squatting the DMB all day. I'm all hyped up.
Yeah.
Nice. My cells are percolated.
Yeah. The last thing I'll ask you about is just, there's a lot of conversation around longevity now. And, we touched on this maybe a little bit when we're talking about kind of death and the fear of death. Some of the longevity kind of movement, if you will, I think is still based in that fear. And it's a kind of sort of a chase of not immortality as much as maybe amortality. But I mean, for me, I feel that humans are on some level coded to die.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues that we have with death now is that it's kind of this distension of morbidity, is that most people are like sick for 20 years before they die, right?
Yeah.
I wonder kind of how you think about longevity and what's a healthy way to think about it?
I think I might have mentioned this quote to you. If I did, it would be redundant, but it won't be redundant for other people. But I was listening to a talk with Ram Dass. I'm pretty sure I did mention this to you. And one of the things that he mentioned in that I just think is so great was when fall comes and the leaves start to turn orange or whatever, you don't go running out to the trees and start painting them green in this like obsessive compulsive, like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like we cannot accept this. Like the seasons cannot change. You look at the trees and you're like, this is so beautiful. Like we need to go to Aspen because this is so incredibly beautiful. We don't do that as people. we paint the leaves green. We do everything we can to prevent the shame of aging another year. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that would probably be the first thing, is coming into a place of compassion for your own biology. Coming to a place of like, oh, this is beautiful. I got some little like crow's feet thing coming. Like, oh, I got some gray in the beard. Like, I like that. Yeah. It'd come into place. Oh, a little cellulite back there. Interesting. Like, what's that all about? All right. Like, become curious about the things that are happening, because ultimately the body is on your team. And if you have the belief that the diabetes that you are experiencing, or the obesity that someone's experiencing, or the hypertension that someone's experiencing, or XYZ, the acne that someone's experiencing, is actually an attack, that you're like a visitor in the body and the body's attacking you, as long as you're in that place, you're going to be meeting that resistance with resistance. So I think a great starting point for humanity would be first to come from a place of compassion for all the things. And a part of that would be to see the different signals or symptoms that the body expresses as actually protective mechanisms to bolster and support your health under a state of environmental duress. I think that's an important factor. To come and say, oh, like, interesting, my body's communicating to me, as opposed to my body's attacking me. And we're not friends and we're not in right relation. It's like I kind of stay over here, the body stays over there. But coming into a place of actually being able to see all of these different symptoms that may arise, or of aging, as being like, oh, interesting, that the body actually is on my team and it's actually acting perfectly in relation to my environmental circumstance. So I think that would be something to just kind of sit with, of like everything that you think that you can't accept about yourself, within yourself, on your skin, anywhere. Maybe just try to come into a place of actually saying like, oh, like, thank you. And I think it's a similar thing if you're in an argument, again, with a partner or a business partner or whatever it may be, and someone goes into kind of more reactive behavior. There is a place to have enough spaciousness to see that reactive behavior as actually a defensive mechanism that at some point in that person's life kept them alive. And right. So you say, oh, wow, like you're being, some emotion that doesn't feel good to me, some personality characteristic that doesn't feel good to me. At some point, that thing actually probably saved their life. Yeah. It was with their mom when she was doing drugs. It was with their dad when he never came home. It was with whatever. And then suddenly they learned how to protect themselves. And now it's like the analogy of the person that has the raft. The raft gets them across the river. And then they keep carrying that raft through the woods for the rest of their life, knocking down trees and weeds and whatnot. And so then it becomes a process, is the way to release that raft and integrate with that raft, to hate the raft, to judge the raft, to judge yourself for having the raft. Or could there be another pathway of saying like, oh man, like sit down with the raft, be like, thank you so much. Like you've taken such good care of me. Like we're good. Like I love you. I'm at peace with you. I'm at ease with you. Suddenly something can kind of alchemize within the self where it's like, okay, cool. Like there's a little bit more space. And now from here, maybe we can choose to actually release the raft or, integrate the self or however that ends up manifesting or looking. And then the other thing with aging, which I don't think that actually really answered your question, but with aging, I think it's like the story that we tell ourselves is very significant. And I did a podcast with a woman, I don't remember her name. She wrote a book about this. She's like a Harvard doctor, psychologist or something. And one of the things that she mentioned in the book, I wish I had it on top of my mind. At some point it might come up and I can mention it. But they were tracking people throughout their lives, and they asked a group of 30-something-year-olds what their perception of aging was. And the people that had the perception of aging, that is like, oh, aging's totally chill. I get a little smarter. I have more opportunity to, I make some money, make some investments, I take care of my body, I get better in relationship. Like every day is just an opportunity to get better and better and better. And then there's the other group of people that are lamenting about the concept of aging and like, oh my God, like I'm going to get, all the things that you don't want to have happen. And then they ask those same people when they're in their 60s, and the incidence of cardiovascular disease was something like 2x higher with the people that had a negative perception of the experience of aging compared to the people that were kind of like copacetic with aging. And so I think that like being protective of the stories that you allow yourself to implant within your subconscious, and so I have a tendency of being pretty protective when people tell me things that reduce power or reduce strength or reduce sovereignty or reduce sensation of agency. And I'm just like, I love that perspective for you, that aging is a process of getting tired, and it's a process of inflammation. It's a process of, poop in your pants and pee in your pants and all that. Like, I love that for you. If that's your story, I think it's a really cool story. It's not my story, but I love it for you. I'm not mad at it, but it's not my story.
Yeah. Become an elder. Don't become elderly.
Don't become an older.
Yeah, I want to be Lao Tzu. I want to have a long white beard. Disappear in a Taoist painting somewhere. Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. I knew that you were like a really sensitive, beautiful guy, but I think you're also a ferryman. You're basically taking the raft back for people, such that they don't have to carry it with them. You're providing that conveyance across the river. You say, hey, I got it. I'm going to bring it back and pick up the next guy. So thanks for doing that. Yeah, man.
Yeah, thank you, man. I really appreciate making time to do this. I appreciate having the last conversation of our lives, or at least having the story. This is the last one.
Yeah. If this is the last one, I feel damn good about it.
It wasn't bad. Not a bad situation.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, man. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. Leave us a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, remember to subscribe so you get each week's episodes. If you enjoyed this, you might also enjoy the episode with Bruce Lipton as well as Gabor Mate. Hope you guys have a beautiful week, and I will see you very soon.